For the first time in human history, Earth was no longer arguing about whether it was alone. That question had been answered. Humanity was not the first intelligent life to look toward the stars and wonder who else might be looking back. And somehow, that was not the most frightening part. The frightening part was that the Avari had come in peace. There had been no invasion, no threats, no demand for surrender. Their ambassador had crossed the impossible distance between stars, entered Earth's atmosphere without fire or thunder, and asked only to speak. 3 simple words had changed civilization forever. We wish to speak. 8 months had passed since the Avari ambassador departed Earth. The world had not returned to normal. Normal no longer existed. News channels ran without pause. Religious leaders filled stadiums. Scientists who had spent their careers searching for signs of life were suddenly being asked to explain technology they could barely comprehend. Markets crashed, recovered, then surged as governments poured money into industries that had not existed a year earlier. Some people celebrated, some prayed, some prepared for the end. Most simply went to work and tried to pretend the sky felt the same. It did not. Factories that once built civilian aircraft now ran through the night producing orbital components. Shipyards expanded along coastlines and in orbit. Universities opened emergency programs in fusion engineering, xenobiology, deep space medicine, and interstellar law. Humanity was not preparing for war, not officially. It was preparing for uncertainty. There was a difference, though fewer people believed it with each passing day. Inside the Pentagon, General Marcus Hale stood before a wall-sized display showing construction projects across Earth and in orbit. Shipyards, fusion facilities, tracking arrays, training academies, launch complexes. Every project was behind schedule. Every project was also moving faster than anything comparable in human history. A young aide entered the room quietly. "Sir, the President is ready." Hale did not look away from the display. "How bad?" The aide hesitated. "Depends who you ask." Hale finally turned. "So very bad." The aide managed a tired smile. "Yes, sir." Hale collected the folders from the table and followed him into the corridor. The Pentagon never truly slept anymore. Neither did the people trying to decide what humanity would become. The Situation Room had changed since first contact. The technology was the same. The table was the same. The walls were the same. The people were different. 8 months of impossible decisions had left their mark. Coffee cups crowded polished surfaces. Reports lay open beside unfinished meals. Every face in the room carried the same exhaustion. President Eleanor Hayes stood beside the central display. "I'll keep this brief." No one believed her. She touched the console, and a holographic Earth appeared above the table. Lights spread across the continents and into orbit. Blue marked construction. Green marked operational facilities. Amber marked delayed programs. Red marked projects in danger of failure. "Orbital Defense Command is functional," the Secretary of Defense began. "Our tracking network now covers the entire inner system. The first permanent orbital yards are online, and the lunar facilities are ahead of revised estimates." A red icon appeared over the Atlantic. "However, the primary battleship program remains dependent on materials and personnel from nations that have not joined the initiative." The hologram shifted. Several countries changed color. President Hayes studied them in silence. An admiral cleared his throat. "We can build the hull." A scientist seated across from him finished the thought. "We cannot build experienced crews." That was the problem no amount of money could solve. Humanity had pilots, engineers, soldiers, doctors, and scientists. What it did not have was anyone who had served aboard an interstellar warship. Every procedure would be written for the first time. Every lesson would be learned at full cost. Every mistake would become history. President Hayes looked around the table. "Steel is no longer our greatest challenge." She paused. "People are." The display changed again. Military academies, universities, research institutions, diplomatic services, intelligence agencies, and medical centers appeared across the globe. "We are not selecting Americans," she said. "We are not selecting Europeans, Russians, Chinese, Japanese, Indians, or anyone else by nationality." Her voice remained calm, but no one mistook that calm for softness. "We are selecting the first generation of people who will represent Earth beyond Earth. Pilots, engineers, scientists, doctors, intelligence officers, diplomats, Marines, the best humanity could offer, drawn from every nation willing to participate." General Hale leaned forward. "We are not merely building a fleet." The room turned toward him. "We are building the people who will command it, maintain it, negotiate from it, and defend it." President Hayes nodded. "And we need every role filled by someone who understands exactly what is being asked of them." Hale rested one hand on a thin personnel file near the edge of the table. "One of those positions may already have its answer." The president looked at the folder. "What position?" Hale slid it toward her. "Commander of the Marine Expeditionary Unit assigned to the flagship." She opened the file. A photograph stared back at her. Captain Daniel Mercer. President Hayes studied the photograph for several seconds. "I've read his service record." "It tells you what he did," Hale said. "It doesn't tell you why I want him." She glanced down again. "Marine infantry officer, combat deployments, commendations, currently on extended leave from active duty, still a Marine." "A truck driver," she said. Hale gave the faintest smile. "That's what the employment line says." The display behind them changed. A younger Mercer appeared in combat gear, dust ground into his uniform, eyes fixed on something beyond the camera. "He enlisted young," Hale continued. "Served in Iraq, led Marines under fire, lost friends, brought others home." The image shifted. Mercer years later, older and quieter, standing beside a disabled vehicle on a rain-soaked highway while traffic crawled around him. No cameras, no ceremony. He stopped because someone needed. President Hayes looked toward Hale. "You're recommending him for one photograph." "No, Madam President." Hale opened another section of the file. "I'm recommending him because every report says the same thing. When conditions deteriorate, Mercer becomes calmer. When people panic, he gives them something useful to do. When authority matters, he uses it. When it doesn't, he leaves it alone." The chairman of the Joint Chiefs folded his arms. "He has been out for years." "So have many of the people we're recalling," Hale replied. "He'll need retraining. He'll get it. He may refuse." Hale looked back at Mercer's photograph. "Then I'll go to Oregon and ask him myself." The president closed the file. "What exactly do you expect him to command?" "The finest Marines we can assemble," Hale said. "Boarding teams, ship security, expeditionary forces, first contact protection details." If the flagship enters hostile territory, Mercer's Marines will be the people standing between the crew and whatever comes through the hatch. The room became quiet. Hale continued. "I don't need a diplomat. I don't need a politician. I need a Marine who understands that protecting people is more important than being seen doing it." President Hayes placed her hand on the file. "When can he be here?" "If he says yes, tomorrow." "And if he says no?" Hale's expression hardened slightly. "Then we make certain he understands what is at stake." Thousands of miles away, the first sunlight crested the Oregon Cascades. Daniel Mercer stood on his porch with a mug of black coffee in his hands, unaware that the future had already begun moving toward him. The morning air carried the scent of pine. Mercer watched the sun break through the trees outside Estacada, turning the wet pavement gold. For a few quiet minutes, the world almost felt normal. A pickup rolled down the road. Birds called from the branches. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at nothing. Mercer took another drink of coffee and looked toward the eastern sky. 8 months since first contact. 8 months since the Avari ship had appeared above Earth and proved every government, every religion, and every scientist had been arguing inside a much larger universe than anyone understood. Part of him wanted to believe the Avari were exactly what they seemed. Peaceful, patient, honest. The Marine in him kept asking the same question. What happens when the next ship is not? The low growl of engines interrupted the thought. 3 black vehicles rounded the corner and slowed in front of his house. 2 SUVs, 1 long government sedan. Mercer watched them stop with practiced precision. Doors opened almost together. Men and women in dark suits stepped onto the pavement and scanned rooftops, windows, vehicles, and tree lines. Mercer sighed. Well, this ought to be interesting. A man in Air Force blue climbed out of the sedan. 3 stars gleamed on his shoulders. Lieutenant General Thomas Whitaker looked older than Mercer remembered, but he carried himself the same way. Whitaker climbed the porch steps. I was wondering how long it would take you to recognize me. Mercer looked him over. You got old. Whitaker laughed. So did you. They shook hands. It was not the handshake of strangers. It was the grip of men who had known each other when trust was measured in seconds. Whitaker glanced toward the house. Mind if we talk? I'm guessing all of this isn't for coffee. No. Mercer stepped aside. The living room was modest and comfortable. Photographs lined the walls, family, friends, places that mattered. One frame held a younger Mercer beside a group of Marines covered in dust and exhaustion, every one of them grinning at the camera. Whitaker stopped in front of it. You still keep that one. Some memories deserve a place on the wall. Whitaker nodded. They'd be proud of you. Mercer did not answer. The silence carried enough. Whitaker opened a leather folder and placed a sealed envelope on the coffee table. The seal of the President of the United States was pressed into the paper. Mercer stared at it. I don't suppose that's a parking ticket. I wish it were. Mercer broke the seal. Inside was a single page. The language was formal. The message was not. Captain Daniel Mercer, the Terran Defense Initiative, requests your report for active assignment to a position critical to the security of humanity. Mercer read it twice. Then he looked up. This says request. Whitaker held his gaze. It does, but you brought Secret Service. Your answer matters. Mercer placed the letter on the table. What position? I can explain more on the aircraft. That isn't an answer. Whitaker leaned forward. Humanity is building its first flagship. General Hale wants you commanding the Marines aboard it. For the first time since the convoy arrived, Mercer said nothing. Whitaker continued. You wouldn't command the ship. You wouldn't negotiate treaties. You would command every Marine assigned to protect that vessel, its crew, and the people humanity sends beyond our system. Mercer looked toward the old photograph on the wall. He had spent the last several months enjoying something he had not experienced in years. Normal life. A life that did not require casualty reports. When do we leave? Whitaker allowed himself a small smile. The aircraft is waiting. Mercer finished the last of his coffee, set the mug beside the letter, and stood. He took one final look around the room before following Whitaker outside. He did not know when he would walk through that door again. Some part of him already understood that when he did, neither he nor the world would be the same. The Gulf Stream climbed through the Oregon clouds and leveled above a white horizon. Mercer sat beside the window while the forests and mountains disappeared beneath them. Across the cabin, Whitaker closed the folder in his hands. I imagine you have questions. Only about 1,000. That few. Mercer leaned back. Start with why me? Whitaker poured 2 cups of coffee and passed one across the aisle. General Hale believes you can command Marines in an environment no Marine has ever trained for. That sounds like a polite way of saying nobody knows what they're doing. It is. Mercer took the cup. At least we're being honest. Whitaker opened a thick binder. Inside were files from around the world, fleet officers, fighter pilots, engineers, scientists, doctors, intelligence specialists, diplomats, Marines. You're one part of a much larger structure, Whitaker said. The flagship will carry people responsible for military command, scientific research, first contact, medical response, intelligence, and diplomacy. Mercer turned a page, a British engineer, a Japanese pilot, a Brazilian surgeon, an Indian physicist, a South African intelligence officer. The list continued. Who's talking to the aliens? Mercer asked. Not you. Mercer looked up. Good. Whitaker laughed. Ambassador Evelyn Shaw is leading the diplomatic effort. She has spent 3 decades negotiating ceasefires, trade agreements, and security accords between governments that refuse to sit in the same room. Sounds patient. She is. Then she and I may not have much in common. You have more in common than you think. Mercer closed the binder. What exactly am I walking into? Whitaker's expression became serious. A divided planet. The display built into the cabin wall illuminated. Earth appeared marked by several colors. Most nations support the Terran Defense Initiative, Whitaker said. Support is not the same as unification. Some governments fear the initiative will become a tool of the largest military powers. Others refuse to surrender control of off-world resources or first contact policy. Mercer studied the map. They think this is empire dressed up as cooperation. Some do. Are they wrong? Whitaker did not answer immediately. That depends on what we build. Mercer looked back toward the files, and my part. You build the Marines, you make certain the flagship has a force capable of protecting civilians, diplomats, and crew without turning every encounter into an occupation. Mercer nodded once. That I understand. Whitaker tapped another control. A rendering appeared. A massive warship under construction in orbit, its unfinished hull surrounded by gantries and work platforms. Mercer stared at it. How far along? Far enough that the shipyard commander promises completion 1 month from now. That would make it 9 months after first contact. Yes, Mercer studied the vessel. It was not elegant like the Avari ship. It was human, armored, angular, built by people who had learned their first lessons about the galaxy from fear. What's her name? Whitaker smiled. That has not been announced. Meaning the president wants the crew to hear it first. The aircraft continued east. Below them, an entire continent passed beneath the clouds. Above them, humanity's first battleship waited to be finished. Before it could represent Earth, Earth had to decide whether it could speak with one voice. The aircraft touched down at Joint Base Andrews shortly after sunrise. Within the hour, Mercer was moving through secured corridors beneath the Pentagon beside Whitaker. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. Armed guards, biometric locks. Steel doors that closed without sound. At the end of the corridor, a final door opened. The Situation Room waited beyond it. President Hayes stood at the head of the table. General Hale was beside her. Senior military officers, scientists, intelligence directors, and civilian officials filled the remaining seats. A woman in a dark gray suit stood near the holographic display. She appeared to be in her late 50s. Silver threaded through her dark hair, and her expression held the calm of someone accustomed to rooms where a single wrong sentence could start a war. President Hayes stepped forward. Captain Mercer. Mercer came to attention. Madam President. At ease. General Hale extended his hand. It's good to finally meet you. Mercer shook it. I've heard that sentence before. Oh, it usually means someone is about to hand me an impossible job. A few tired smiles moved through the room. Hale nodded. You're catching on. The president turned toward the woman beside the display. Captain Mercer, this is Ambassador Evelyn Shaw, Chief Representative of the Terran Defense Initiative and lead negotiator for the proposed Terran Collective. Shaw offered her hand. Captain, Ambassador, I understand you will command the Marines aboard the flagship. If General Hale has his way. Hale spoke from behind them. I usually do. Shaw's expression softened slightly. I sincerely hope we never require your profession. Mercer released her hand. So do I. There was no challenge in his voice, only agreement. President Hayes gestured toward the table. Please sit. The room dimmed, Earth appeared above them. This time it was not marked by construction projects. It was divided by political alignment. Blue nations had accepted the framework of the Terran Collective. Amber nations were negotiating. Red nations had refused. Mercer studied the map without speaking. Ambassador Shaw took control of the display. The Terran Collective is not intended to replace national governments, she said. Every country retains sovereignty over its territory, laws, culture, and domestic military. The hologram shifted, separating Earth from the space around it. The collective would hold authority over interstellar diplomacy, off-world defense, first contact policy, and shared extrasolar resources. A senior advisor folded his hands, and the holdouts believe that distinction will disappear the moment the first warship launches. Shaw nodded. They believe the major powers will control the collective through funding, personnel, and military force. Mercer glanced toward the unfinished battleship hovering in a smaller display. They look at that ship and see who built the guns. Several people turned toward him. Shaw did not seem offended. Yes, she said, they do. President Hayes leaned forward. Can they be brought in? Shaw looked toward the Red Nations. Yes. The confidence in her answer changed the room. The Secretary of State raised an eyebrow. How? By addressing the argument they are actually making rather than the argument we wish they were making. Shaw enlarged the first red region. Some want guaranteed representation. Another. Some want independent inspection of the fleet. Another. Some refuse to place their forces under foreign command. She looked around the table. None of those concerns are irrational. An admiral shifted in his seat. We cannot allow every nation to veto military operations. No, Shaw replied, but we can build safeguards that prevent any one nation from controlling them. The room went quiet. Shaw continued. The collective cannot be an American project with international decorations. It cannot be Chinese, European, Russian, Indian, or anyone else's project. Her eyes moved across the table. It must belong to humanity or it will fail before the first ship leaves orbit. General Hale folded his arms. What do you need? Authority to negotiate binding protections, such as rotating civilian leadership, independent oversight, shared command appointments, equal access to off-world discoveries. A charter that explicitly prevents the collective from interfering in domestic government. The president listened without interruption. Shaw touched the display again. A countdown appeared, 28 days. That is how long the shipyard says it needs to complete the battleship. Mercer watched the numbers, and you want every nation signed before then. I want every nation represented when that vessel enters service, Shaw said. Why? She looked directly at him. Because the first Terran battleship cannot belong to a coalition. The display rotated slowly between them. It must belong to Earth. Mercer considered that, then nodded. That makes sense. President Hayes looked around the table. Ambassador Shaw, you have your authority. Shaw inclined her head. Then I leave tonight. For where? Mercer asked. Shaw looked back toward the Red Nations glowing across the hologram. Wherever they are still willing to listen. The countdown continued. 28 days until the battleship was complete. 28 days for humanity to decide whether it would greet the galaxy as a collection of rival nations or as one people. Ambassador Evelyn Shaw left Washington before sunset. By midnight, her aircraft was crossing the Atlantic. She carried no ceremonial delegation, no military escort, no promise that the meeting waiting for her would end well. Only a small diplomatic team, several sealed documents, and 27 days before humanity's first battleship entered service. The nation they were flying toward had refused every previous invitation to join the Terran Collective, not because its leaders believed humanity should remain divided, because they believed unification under the wrong terms would create something worse. A planetary government controlled by the nations with the largest militaries. An empire built beneath the language of survival. Shaw understood the fear. That was why she had chosen to begin there. Thousands of miles behind her, Daniel Mercer stood inside a secure training facility beneath Quantico. 32 Marines waited in formation. Americans, British, Australians, Japanese, French, Polish, South Korean, Brazilian, South African. Men and women drawn from units that had spent generations training under different flags, using different doctrines, and answering to different chains of command. Now they had been placed in the same room and told they might become the first Marines assigned to an interstellar warship. Mercer walked slowly along the front rank. Some stood rigidly. Some watched him with open curiosity. A few looked unimpressed. He understood all three reactions. They knew his record. They also knew he had been away on leave while the program took shape. Respect written on paper was not respect earned in person. Mercer stopped in front of them. You've all been told why you're here. No one moved. You've been told that humanity is building its first flagship. He let the silence settle. You've been told that some of you may serve aboard it. A Marine near the end of the formation shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. Mercer noticed. He noticed everything. What you have not been told, Mercer continued, is what that actually means. He turned toward the dark training chamber behind him. The lights rose. A full-scale section of the unfinished battleship's interior appeared. Narrow corridors, pressure doors, bulkheads, airlocks, mock control stations. The walls were incomplete, their wiring and structural support still exposed. It looked less like the future and more like a machine that had been opened for repair. Mercer faced them again. No one knows what we're going to encounter beyond our system. His voice remained even. We may escort diplomats. We may secure landing zones. We may board damaged vessels. We may protect civilians during first contact. He paused, or we may be the last thing standing between that crew and something that wants them dead. No one shifted now. You are not here because your country believes you're the best. Several expressions tightened. You are here because someone believes you might become part of the best unit humanity has ever assembled. Mercer looked from face to face. That is not the same thing. He pointed toward the training chamber. Inside that ship, your old ranks matter less than your ability to adapt. Your flag matters less than the Marine beside you. Your traditions matter only if they help keep people alive. He stepped closer to the formation. You will learn each other's weapons, each other's procedures, each other's commands, and by the time that battleship leaves orbit, I expect you to operate as one force. A British Royal Marine near the front spoke. With respect, sir, under whose doctrine? Mercer looked at him. Whichever doctrine works. A few restrained smiles appeared. Mercer did not return them. If yours is better, we use yours. He looked down the line. If theirs is better, we use theirs. He tapped his chest once. If mine is wrong, you tell me before it gets someone killed. The room became still. That answer mattered more than any speech. Mercer turned toward the mock corridor. Welcome to the first day. The pressure door slammed shut behind them. Training began. Ambassador Shaw's aircraft landed beneath a gray morning sky. Rain streaked across the windows as the diplomatic convoy moved through the capital. Crowds gathered behind barriers. Some held signs supporting the Terran collective. Others held signs accusing it of betrayal, the same fear expressed in opposite directions. Shaw watched them pass without comment. Across from her, Deputy Ambassador Karim had reviewed the latest intelligence briefing. The Prime Minister's coalition is unstable, he said. If he appears weak, the opposition could force a confidence vote. He isn't afraid of us, Shaw said. No, he's afraid of what agreeing with us will cost him at home. Haddad closed the report. That may be harder. It usually is. The convoy entered an underground government complex. Security officers searched every case, every device, and every member of the delegation. They were polite. They were also thorough enough to make the message clear. Trust had not yet entered the building. Shaw was escorted into a long conference room. Prime Minister Viktor Antonov waited at the opposite end of the table. He did not rise. Neither did the military chiefs seated beside him. Shaw took her place without reacting. Prime Minister. Ambassador. Antonov looked toward the sealed folders placed before her. You have come to ask again. No, that drew his attention. Shaw folded her hands. I have come to listen. One of the generals beside him gave a quiet, humorless laugh. Your president gives you 27 days to listen. Shaw looked toward him. My president gave me authority to negotiate. Authority granted by whom? Antonov asked. The nations that have already decided what the future will look like. No, Shaw opened the first folder, authority that becomes meaningless if you do not participate. The Prime Minister studied her. You expect me to believe that. I expect you to challenge it. She pushed the document across the table. Antonov did not touch it. What is this? A revised charter. We have seen your charter. You have seen the version written without you. Silence filled the room. Shaw continued. This version includes permanent independent inspection rights for every member nation. Another document followed, rotating civilian leadership. Another, shared military command. Another, a prohibition against using collective forces to intervene in domestic political disputes. Antonov finally looked down at the papers. His defense minister leaned closer. And if a member violates the charter, then the collective court may suspend that government's voting authority and remove its officers from command. The general who had laughed earlier spoke again. A court controlled by your allies. Judges selected equally by region, Shaw replied. No permanent seats, no national vetoes. Antonov looked up. The largest nations will still provide the most ships. Yes, the most weapons. Yes, the most personnel. At first. His expression hardened. Then they will possess the most power. Shaw did not deny it. That is why power must be divided before the fleet grows. The answer seemed to surprise him. Most negotiators would have argued. Shaw simply acknowledged the danger. Antonov leaned back. You admit the collective could become what we fear. Anything built by people can become something its founders feared. She held his gaze. The answer is not to remain outside it. The answer is to help build the walls that keep it contained. The Prime Minister looked toward his advisors. No one spoke. Shaw continued more quietly. Your government believes the major powers intend to control humanity's future. Yes. Then why would you leave them alone in the room where that future is being written? Antonov's eyes narrowed. For the first time, the meeting had moved beyond prepared statements. You believe we should join so we can restrain you. I believe you should join because restraint is part of partnership. The defense minister opened the charter. What command position are you offering? Shaw turned toward him. Not offering. He frowned. Then what? Asking you to nominate. She opened another file. The first battleship requires a deputy engineering commander. Your orbital reactor program is among the most advanced on Earth. One of the officers looked up sharply. You would place one of ours aboard the flagship. If the candidate meets the standard, and if your officers object, they may object professionally. Shaw's expression remained calm. They may not object nationally. Antonov finally reached for the charter. What about technology recovered beyond Earth? Shared research access, military discoveries, restricted by collective classification, not national ownership. Resources, distributed by negotiated contribution and need. The Prime Minister turned several pages. You have changed much. We had to, because you need us. Shaw nodded. Yes. The honesty landed harder than flattery would have. We need your engineers. We need your industry. We need your experience. She looked around the table. But more than that, we need you to believe the collective belongs to you. Antonov closed the document, and if I refuse, then the battleship launches without your flag. Shaw did not threaten him. She did not need to. Your scientists remain outside shared research. Your officers remain outside command. Your people watch humanity enter the galaxy through someone else's decisions. She paused. I do not believe that is what you want. The Prime Minister studied her for a long time. Then he looked toward the rain running down the windows. What I want is time. Shaw glanced at the clock. You have 27 days. A few of the officials exchanged looks. Antonov looked back at her. You came prepared to stay. I came prepared to finish. For the first time, the Prime Minister smiled. It was not agreement, but it was movement. Then we begin with Article 1. At Quantico, the first day ended with half the candidates exhausted and all of them angry. The mock corridor had been filled with smoke. Communications had failed. The lights had gone dark. Mercer had given them a simple task: move a wounded civilian from one compartment to another. They had completed it in 12 minutes. The casualty had died in 6. Mercer stood beside the training display while the candidates gathered around him. A Japanese Marine officer removed her helmet. The route was blocked. Yes, the secondary access door failed. Yes, our communications were disabled. Yes, a French commando shook his head. The exercise was designed to make us fail. Mercer looked at him. So is combat. Silence followed. Mercer replayed the simulation. Each mistake appeared in sequence. Conflicting commands, unfamiliar hand signals, 2 teams attempting the same task. No one checking the casualties, breathing after the first minute. Mercer stopped the recording. You did not fail because you lacked courage. He looked around the room. You failed because each of you tried to solve the problem the way your old unit would have solved it. He restarted the footage. You had 6 languages in that corridor and no common vocabulary. The British Marine folded his arms. So what now? Now you build one. Mercer handed him a marker. Tomorrow we run it again. A groan moved through the room. Mercer raised an eyebrow. Something funny. No, sir. Good. He started toward the exit, then stopped. One more thing. They looked toward him. The casualty in that corridor was represented by a training dummy. His voice hardened. On the flagship, it may be an ambassador, a scientist, a child. One of your Marines. He looked back at the frozen image on the screen. You do not get to decide the situation was unfair. You only get to decide whether they come home. Mercer left them with the recording. Behind him, the arguing began, not between nations, between professionals trying to build something none of them had been taught to become: a single unit. In the government complex across the ocean, Article 1 took 7 hours. Article 2 took 11. By the 3rd day, neither delegation had slept more than a few hours. By the 5th, they had rewritten the command structure twice. By the 7th, the Prime Minister's opposition accused him of surrendering national sovereignty. He suspended the talks before noon. Shaw found him alone on a balcony overlooking the capital. The rain had stopped. The city below shone beneath a pale afternoon sky. You should be inside, Antonov said. So should you. He looked toward the streets. My people believe I am selling their future. Some of mine believe I am giving too much away. Are you? Yes. That answer made him turn. Shaw stepped beside him. Everyone will give up something. Then no one wins. No. She looked toward the horizon. Everyone survives. Antonov rested his hands on the railing. You speak as though war is inevitable. I speak as though the Avari may not be the only civilization that knows where Earth is. The Prime Minister said nothing. Shaw continued. The first visitors came peacefully. The next may not, and if the next do not, then we will have built something better without needing to fire a shot. Antonov gave a quiet laugh. You diplomats always make compromise sound noble. No, Shaw looked at him. I make it sound necessary. A distant aircraft crossed the sky. Antonov watched it disappear. If I sign, I want the charter ratified publicly. It will be. I want every military appointment reviewed by a multinational council. Agreed. I want no permanent national control of the flagship. Agreed. And I want our engineers aboard before launch. Shaw allowed herself the smallest smile. Submit the names. Antonov held out his hand. I have not signed. She shook it anyway. Not yet. The announcement came 12 days after Shaw left Washington. The nation that had most strongly opposed the Terran Collective had agreed to join the final charter negotiations. Across Earth, markets climbed. Crowds gathered outside embassies. Supporters celebrated. Opponents warned that nothing had been signed. Both were correct. Inside the Situation Room, President Hayes watched another nation on the holographic map change from red to amber. General Hale stood beside her. One down. Shaw's voice came through the secure display from across the ocean. Not down, General. Hale glanced toward the screen. Then what would you call it? Listening. The president looked toward the remaining red nations. How many meetings are already scheduled? All of them, and how many do you believe will sign? Shaw was quiet for a moment. All of them. Hale studied her expression. You sound certain. I sound committed. The connection ended. President Hayes looked at the countdown. 15 days remained. 15 days until the battleship was complete. 15 days to turn negotiation into unity. Around the world, aircraft began moving. Diplomats crossed borders. Military officers exchanged documents. Engineers received security clearances from governments that had considered one another enemies for generations. At Quantico, Mercer watched Marines from 11 nations carry the simulated casualty through the same corridor that had defeated them days earlier. The lights failed. The smoke rose. The communications died. This time no one argued. One team cleared the route. One secured the casualty. One established hand signals through the darkness. They reached the final compartment with 43 seconds remaining. The medical evaluator checked the dummy and looked toward Mercer. Alive! A cheer erupted through the chamber. Mercer let it continue for 3 seconds. Then he raised his voice. Reset the course. The cheering stopped. Several Marines stared at him. Mercer folded his arms. You think the galaxy only gets one attempt? The pressure door opened again. Smoke poured into the corridor. This time they entered it together. And far above Earth, surrounded by scaffolding and welding light, the first Terran battleship moved one day closer to completion. The conference hall overlooked Lake Geneva. Gray clouds drifted low across the water while a steady rain whispered against the towering glass walls. Inside, the room was silent. Not because it was empty, because history was waiting. Representatives from every recognized nation on Earth slowly found their seats. Heads of state, prime ministers, presidents, kings, military advisors, scientists, diplomats. For nearly a month they had argued over every sentence contained within the charter resting before them. Every article, every amendment, every word, every comma. 27 days earlier, this meeting had seemed impossible. Now it was unavoidable. Ambassador Evelyn Shaw stood quietly beside the podium. She looked tired. The kind of tired that no amount of sleep could fix. She had crossed 6 continents, visited 18 capitals, spent more nights aboard aircraft than in hotels. She had negotiated through translators, cultural differences, political rivalries, and centuries of distrust. More than once, she had nearly boarded an aircraft home believing the Terran Collective would never become reality. Yet somehow she was still here. President Eleanor Hayes walked beside her, not to stand above the other leaders, but among them. How are you holding up? The president asked softly. Shaw managed a faint smile. I've had easier months. Hayes looked around the chamber. I don't think any of us have. Near the back of the hall, General Marcus Hale stood beside Captain Daniel Mercer. Mercer wore a freshly pressed Marine Corps service uniform. On his shoulder rested a patch no Marine had ever worn before. Terran Defense Initiative, the first of its kind. Mercer caught Hale looking at it. Feels strange. Hale nodded. It should. He looked across the room. You're looking at the last gathering where every military officer represents a different nation. Mercer followed his gaze: American, British, Japanese, Australian, French, Indian, Brazilian, South African, German, Canadian, dozens more, different flags, different languages, different histories, soon one mission. The conversation slowly faded. Ambassador Shaw stepped to the podium. She did not adjust the microphone, she did not clear her throat, she simply looked around the room. "We've rewritten this charter." A small smile crossed her face. 37 times, a few quiet chuckles drifted through the chamber. "We've debated every article, every definition, every concern." She rested one hand on the document before her. "And that is exactly why it deserves to exist." Silence. Not uncomfortable silence, respectful silence. This charter does not erase our nations. It protects them. It does not replace our cultures. It ensures they will survive long enough to be shared with the stars. Her eyes moved across the assembled leaders. For all of human history, our greatest achievements have often followed our greatest tragedies. She paused. "I would like this to be remembered as the first great achievement that came before the tragedy." No applause followed. There did not need to be. She stepped away from the podium. The invitation had been given, nothing more needed saying. The first leader stood. Without fanfare, he walked to the table, picked up the pen, signed his name. The scratching of ink across paper echoed through the silent hall. Then he stepped aside. Another leader approached, then another. One signature became 5, 5 became 20, 20 became 50. The room remained almost completely silent. Only the sound of pens moving across paper filled the chamber. Mercer watched quietly. He had seen peace agreements before. Most had been signed after countless lives had already been lost. This one was being signed before the first shot had ever been fired. The final signature dried. President Hayes carefully closed the charter. She looked toward Ambassador Shaw. "It belongs to all of us now." Shaw nodded. "It always should have." A technician stepped toward the center of the chamber. With a single touch, the holographic Earth hanging above the delegates slowly changed. Every nation, every orbital facility, every participating territory shifted to the same deep blue, not because borders had disappeared, but because, for the first time in history, humanity had agreed to stand together beyond them. New words slowly appeared beneath the rotating globe. The Terran Collective. No one clapped, no one cheered, many simply stared. Some smiled. Others quietly wiped tears from their eyes. They all understood what they were witnessing, not the end of nations, the beginning of civilization. General Hale quietly extended his hand toward Mercer. "Congratulations, Captain." Mercer looked at him. "For what?" Hale smiled. "You just became one of the first officers in Terran history." Mercer shook his hand. "I've got a feeling the paperwork is about to become unbearable." For the first time all afternoon, the room laughed. A small moment. A very human moment. Exactly what the day needed. Far above Earth, thousands of workers secured the final armored plates onto humanity's first battleship. The brilliant flashes of welding torches faded one by one. Massive construction arms slowly withdrew from the vessel's hull. The chief shipyard engineer removed his helmet. He stood alone on the observation platform, looking across the enormous ship stretching away into the darkness. For nearly 9 months, every day had been spent chasing impossible deadlines. Every setback had been answered with longer hours. Every problem had been solved because failure simply was not an option. He placed a weathered hand against the cool gray armor, then quietly smiled. "She's ready." Somewhere below, an entire planet had finally become one. Now humanity was ready to show the galaxy who it had chosen to become. 9 months after first contact, Earth looked different. Orbital traffic had tripled. Construction platforms surrounded the moon like tiny stars. Freighters moved constantly between Earth, Luna, and the expanding shipyards suspended high above the atmosphere. Humanity had not simply looked toward the stars. It had begun building a road to them. Thousands of guests filled the primary observation decks of Orbital Shipyard 1. Engineers stood beside welders. scientists beside Marines. Heads of state stood shoulder to shoulder with the technicians who had spent the last 9 months sleeping beside the ship they had built. No reserved sections, no preferred seats. Today belonged to everyone. President Eleanor Hayes stepped onto the platform overlooking the dry dock. Behind her stretched the largest spacecraft ever constructed by human hands. Gone were the construction cranes. Gone were the exposed support frames. For the first time, the vessel stood complete. Dark gray armor reflected the distant sunlight. Massive railgun housings sat recessed within the hull. Missile batteries rested behind armored blast doors. Rows of point defense turrets tracked silently through diagnostic routines. She looked powerful, not because she was designed for conquest, because she had been built to ensure humanity would never face the unknown defenseless. President Hayes allowed the crowd to absorb the sight before speaking. For thousands of years, our ancestors crossed rivers. They crossed oceans. They crossed continents. Each sentence echoed across the enormous shipyard. They did not cross them because they knew what waited on the other side. They crossed because humanity has always believed tomorrow was worth discovering. She turned toward the battleship. Today we cross one more frontier. The applause faded. General Marcus Hale stepped forward. Captain Daniel Mercer. Mercer, standing with the assembled Marines, stepped from the formation. He came to attention. "Sir." Hale smiled. "I've been waiting a long time for this." A Marine approached carrying a polished wooden case. When Hale opened it, the crowd became quiet. Inside rested a single insignia, unlike anything ever worn by any military on Earth. A silver globe, a ring of stars, crossed swords beneath it. President Hayes stepped beside Hale. The Terran Collective has inherited centuries of military tradition. She looked toward the assembled service members. But today, we create one of our own. Hale removed Mercer's captain insignia. For a brief moment, Mercer's collar was empty. Then the new insignia was pinned into place. President Hayes spoke clearly enough for every microphone in the shipyard to carry her words. By the authority granted to this office under the charter of the Terran Collective, Captain Daniel Mercer is hereby appointed the First Marshal of the Terran Expeditionary Marines. The crowd erupted into applause, but Hayes was not finished. "Marshal Mercer, you are charged with organizing, training, and commanding every Marine assigned to the First Interstellar Fleet and every fleet that follows." Mercer stood silently. Even he seemed unsure how to process the moment. General Hale extended his hand. "Congratulations, Marshal." Mercer accepted it. "I'll do my best not to embarrass humanity." A quiet laugh spread through the audience. Hale smiled. "I wasn't worried." President Hayes stepped toward the ceremonial podium. "It is my honor to officially commission humanity's first interstellar battleship." She looked toward the vessel. "From this day forward, you shall be known as..." The massive holographic display illuminated UTC Unity. Thunderous applause echoed through the orbital shipyard. Across Earth, millions watching from homes, schools, military bases, and city squares rose to their feet. For a brief moment, the entire planet celebrated together. An alert chimed softly across the command deck. One of the traffic controllers looked up. "Madam President." His voice carried an unmistakable note of surprise. "We have an incoming vessel." General Hale frowned. "It wasn't on the schedule." The controller shook his head. "No, sir. It just exited warp." Every eye turned toward the enormous observation windows. A brilliant point of blue light appeared beyond the shipyard. Then another. Space itself seemed to ripple. A sleek white vessel emerged silently from the distortion. Elegant, graceful, unmistakably Avari. A smile spread across Ambassador Talon's face as he stepped from the shuttle a few moments later. He bowed politely toward President Hayes. "My friends, I hope we are not late." Hayes smiled. "You arrived at exactly the right moment." Talon looked toward the UTC Unity. His eyes reflected genuine admiration. You have accomplished much in only 9 months. We've had excellent motivation, Hayes replied. The ambassador chuckled softly. I can see that. Then his expression changed. There is one more matter. He looked back toward the stars. I have not come alone. General Hale exchanged a glance with Marshal Mercer. Another distortion formed in the darkness beyond the shipyard. This one was different. Instead of brilliant blue, it shimmered with soft emerald light. A second vessel emerged, smaller than the Avari ship, far more organic. Its flowing hull seemed almost grown rather than built. Silence settled across the observation deck. President Hayes looked toward Ambassador Talon. You weren't expecting this. Talon smiled. Oh, I was. He turned back toward humanity. I simply wished it to be a surprise. The elegant vessel eased gently toward the docking. Talon's voice carried quiet pride. President Hayes, Marshal Mercer, it is my great honor to introduce the representative of the Sylvan Commonwealth. The docking clamps engaged with a deep metallic thud. The outer hatch began to open. Mercer found himself holding his breath. The galaxy had just become a little larger.